各位議員，我哋應該啱夠人可以開始嘅會議嘅。
Let me call the meeting to order since we have a quorum and it is the appointed time.
使唔使請佢哋入嚟先啊？咁啊，自從上
Since the last meeting, we have issued 2 information papers. Please take note of that. These are Mr. Stephen Ho and Mr. Chen Pan co-signed a letter proposing a study tour to Taiwan to look at the agriculture there. And then Mr. Wong Kwok-hing also wrote on the excessive cadmium found in rice. Mr. Wong Kwok-hing's letter has been referred to the administration for a written response. Before Mr. Wong Kwok-hing wrote in, actually, I myself also wrote to government departments asking them to clarify the situation of mainland rice containing heavy metal, but no replies have been received yet. I will ask the clerk to pursue that with the administration, and then afterwards we'll see whether we need to have a discussion item on this at the panel. Next time we are going to discuss food safety, and of course we can ask officials to also comment on rice. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning my letter. My concern is about imported rice into Hong Kong, whether harmful substances are included in imported rice, including the metal cadmium. And imported rice, I don't mean just rice from the mainland. So, Chairman, if you are going to include this for the next meeting, please ask the administration to give us the result or findings of the random check, and they should not just give an oral report. Okay, we will include this in the agenda items of our next meeting, and we'll ask them to give us information for reference beforehand. As for the study trip to Taiwan, I'd like to listen to members about your initial response, and that is to conduct a study tour in the name of the panel outside Hong Kong. We do not have a lot of time to discuss this today, but I'd like to gauge your initial response. In other words, do you want to go on a study trip together outside Hong Kong? If yes, where? As you know, we are quite active this year. We already have local trips. We have been to a Colonel, and next week we are going to Menkam To. And where else do you think we should go so that we will be benefited from that kind of site visit in the execution of the work of this panel? I welcome your proposals, and I will ask the clerk to see whether arrangements can be made and whether our proposals are feasible. Mr. Chen Pan, have a go first. Thank you, Chairman. The panel made previous arrangements for study tours, but I think agricultural policies are becoming more and more important. As you know, we'd like to revitalize farmland in Hong Kong, and in the policy address it is said that there will be an agricultural policy. Mr. Stephen Ho and I are proposing to go to Taiwan because they are quite advanced in their agricultural policy, and I believe there is a lot which will be of beneficial reference for us. So Mr. Stephen Ho and myself have written this letter to propose that we should go to Taiwan to look at their agricultural policy and also their husbandry policies. I hope members will comment on this. Maybe Mr. Stephen Ho can add. Let us listen to other members. What are your initial views? Members, please do put forward your views. Mr. Wu Chi-wai? I think the Deputy Chairman can have a go first. Well, it doesn't matter. Mr. Wong Kwok-hing, did you raise your hand? do you want to speak on this topic? So Mr. Wong Kwok-hing first, and then Mr. Wu Shi-wai. Please be brief. Yes, I'll be brief. I wouldn't object to having study tours outside Hong Kong, but I will not join these study tours. On the topic proposed, you are talking about going to Taiwan, but the mainland exports a lot of their agricultural products to Hong Kong. You go to the mainland anytime and you will see very advanced developments vis-a-vis agriculture. Why do you propose Taiwan instead of the mainland? I find this a little strange. If the study tour should yield results, maybe the clerk can be asked to do a comparison as to why a place is preferred to another. It doesn't really matter where we go, but we must go to a place where there are things we can learn about and be useful to Hong Kong, or else it will be a waste of time and there will not be any results. I wouldn't join these tours, but I won't object to you going. Let me respond to Mr. Wong. I also think that we can think about whether we could go back to the mainland for a study tour. We are very concerned about food safety, and as you know, most of our food items are imported from the mainland. But from what I know, not too many panels go to the mainland for study trips. We can look into the possibility of this choice. Let me listen to other members, Wu Chi-wai and then Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chairman. Agricultural policies are going to be a central issue. But if we don't know what we are going to look at, then I am not sure why we are going. And in fact, their Ministry of Agriculture and also online does provide a lot of information. So my own proposal is we should ask our research and library division to do basic research to ensure in our minds what are the difficulties vis-a-vis our own agricultural policy in Hong Kong, and then we can draw up a framework for going on this study trip. Or else we will just be going and say, let us have a general look. And as Mr. Wong said, what we are going to see may not be very useful for us. Miss Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Mr. Wu said. We must be very careful about the aim of such study trips. Let us not give people the impression that we are going on a pleasure tour. We must be very careful about the purpose. But I find it strange that Mr. Wong Kwok-hing has said that it doesn't matter where we are going, he doesn't mind. But then he also said we should go to the mainland. But I don't have a home visit permit. Now, if we should not go because we don't have the home visit permit, then I think it amounts to discrimination. Let us put that aside first. Basically, I agree going to Taiwan because its agricultural culture, let's say, is very much akin to Hong Kong. And Taiwan has got sound anti-pollution and greening policies. Deputy Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Why do we propose going to Taiwan? It is because its environment and branding have been done very well. We can go there to see new planting methods and new fruit items. And also they have a pollutionless style. It's very seldom that I agree with Miss Claudia Mo, but in fact its pollutionless approach can help tackle pollution in Hong Kong. And as you know, we have this avian flu problem. And also they showcase revitalization of landfills. In the policy address, as you know, we have a 1 billion fund for revitalizing landfills. I hope this will be useful to the trade. Also, policy-wise, it has drawn up trade management policies. I think the RSD can take a look at all these. Okay, we have heard members. I will ask the clerk to liaise with the Research and Library Division to look at where we should go, and then the issues involved and things that we should look at, say agricultural policy, and where we should go, how can we make the trip most effective. Let us wait for the information, and then we can come back here at the panel to make a decision. Okay. Item 2 on the agenda, date of the next meeting and items for discussion. Please look at the list of outstanding items for discussion, which has been issued to members. The next meeting will be held on the 11th of March, a Tuesday at 2:30 in the same room, room 3. And according to the list of items for discussion, we should have 3 items for the next meeting. 1, implementation of the Food Safety Ordinance. 2, report on the food surveillance program for 2013. And 3, application of the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources to Hong Kong. Just now, Mr. Wong mentioned the issue about rice. I believe we'll ask the Bureau to give us a response under item 2, report on the food surveillance program for 2013. And then there is something else we need to follow up on, which is a new item. And that is about the keeping of live chickens. We just had a special meeting, and many members have talked about streaming or segregating live chickens imported into Hong Kong and locally bred chickens. We have heard from the Bureau that it seems they have identified certain sites that could be used for streaming different kinds of chickens. Maybe at the next meeting we can ask them to let us have a brief report on siting of the segregation facility. But because of this, we may have to lengthen our meeting by 30 minutes. Do you agree? If you do not disagree, we'll ask the Bureau to follow up on live chickens and also segregating them at the wholesale level. Okay, next. Item 3. Yes, Mr. Wu Chi-wai? Chairman, since we are going to talk about food safety, I think there is another issue of major concern, and that is imported food from Japan and how they are checked in Hong Kong, because there is information flowing around that in fact food items imported from Japan may be polluted or contaminated to a large extent by Fukushima radiation. I think we should take a look at that, because we import food from Japan as well. We'd like to know how the inspection system can make sure that what we have in Hong Kong will not be contaminated by radiation from Fukushima. Well, since we have food safety for the next meeting, we have already got a study trip or site visit to Mankamto to ensure the safety of land imported food items from the mainland. But Mr. Wu Chi-wai is talking about food items brought to us by air and how inspection is done. Okay, we can ask the clerk to make the arrangements, and we will circulate to you, and let us see how that is done. Perhaps we can have that site visit locally before the March meeting. We need to have 3 before we can go on that site visit.
So would our staff please invite the administration in? And on the agenda, the administration has requested that we deal with the last item on the agenda first, that is the revision of fees and charges under the AFCD. This involves a legislative process, so we will deal with this item first. So may I welcome from the administration Mr. Christopher Wong, Dr. Thomas Sid, and Mr. Clive Lau, Senior Agricultural Officer of the AFCD. This item is scheduled to end at around 3:15. Would members who would like to speak on this item please raise their hands? Mr. Wong Kwok-hing. So, Ma'am Clerk will see if any other members would like to speak. And I will first invite Mr. Christopher Wong, Deputy Secretary for Food and Health, to briefly walk us through this paper and this proposal. Thank you, Madam Chair. This paper seeks to explain to members the AFCD's proposal to revise 18 fee items for services provided. These fees will be adjusted, and on the revision of fees and charges, the government's principle or policy is to told the user pay principle, and during the last budget, the Financial Secretary indicated that we need to ensure a stable income, and also there is consideration to uphold fiscal sustainability, and we should holistically review all the fees and charges, and there are some major principles to follow. First of all, we should deal with fee items which have not been revised for many years and do not directly affect people's livelihood. And we've also been asked to review items which have low cost recovery rates. And the Financial Secretary and the government also understand that substantial revisions at one go would have a heavy impact on the people. So we have been careful in formulating this proposal to avoid affecting people's livelihood. And all departments then underwent a review of the fee items, and the AFCD is seeking members' views on the proposal to revise 18 fee items under 3 categories. The first one being pesticides regulations under the Pesticides Ordinance, license fees, etc., 14 of them. The second category has to do with the public health animals and birds exhibitions regulation, and for the third category, public health animals riding establishment regulations, license fees again. And under these 3 major categories, major stakeholders include traders and retailers, and those that who need to exhibit animals, birds, business entities, leisure farmers, and finally for the third category, persons running riding establishments, persons or companies. And the AFCD has adhered to the several major principles, including the full cost recovery principle, and the current cost recovery levels range from 31.4% to 83.9%. And in order to avoid a steep fee increase, we have adopted the some major principles, and let me highlight some of them. For items with an existing cost recovery rate of less than 40%, we propose to adopt an increase of about 20%. For items with an existing cost recovery rate of 40 to 70%, we propose to increase it by to 15%. And for a recovery rate of over 70%, we propose to have an increase of about 10% or less. And based on the above guidelines, we propose to adjust the 18 fee items with increases ranging from 9% to 20%. So that's an increase of $15 to $700 or $800. And the AFCD, on the adjustment of these fee items, has already issued letters to stakeholders to inform them of the fee revision proposal. And so far, we have received feedback from 2 persons. One stakeholder would wish to would wish the fees to remain at the present level, and the other indicated support. And amendment to the subsidiary legislation would be necessary to give effect to the fee revision. And we plan to table the amendments in May, and we hope that after scrutiny, the new fee items can take effect in July. So members who wish to ask questions, please indicate. Mr. Stephen Ho, Deputy Chairman, followed by Mr. Wong Kwok-hing. Right, let's see if other members would like to speak on this item as well. Let's see how much time we have. So 3 minutes for the time being. All right, a simple question. I understand that it is the government's policy to uphold the user pay principle, and for a cost recovery rate of less than 40 at the moment, there will be an increase of about 20%. It sounds reasonable, but my question is, how do you set the cost? And before the fee increase, what have you done to control cost? Because the general public doesn't know internal operations. If, say, you recruit 2 more staff, then that might not be fair to the users. Mr. Wong, based on the user pays principle, and it is the government's policy to accept these applications, including license applications, and a vetting process is required. It has to be done manually. Of course, it's also supported by a computer system. And to further enhance efficiency, we hope to streamline the process by relying more on computers. And for AFCD fees and charges, where there are larger number of applications, it will be more efficient for us to use computers. We hope that through computerizing these applications, we can lower the cost. Madam Chair, I understand you're trying to use computers to lower the cost, but it seems he hasn't answered me what specifically he is doing. How are the calculations done? For the 18 fee items, let's say if I'm applying for a particular license, apart from the license application, there is other work to be done. So how is the calculation done? Well, internally, the administration has a costing exercise to find out how much time each staff member spends on a particular item. And there are accounting principles to follow. We can supplement the information after the meeting. But basically, we look at how much manpower is needed for a particular task, and to calculate the time spent on that task. Mr. Wong Kwok-hing. Madam Chair, I support this paper in principle because, first of all, the fee revision doesn't directly affect the people, and taxpayers should not subsidize their cost of business, and the increase is not very substantial. So I support this paper, but I'd like to criticize the administration here, because, for example, for the 14 fee items under pesticides regulations, the levels were set in 1997. It's been 17 years. Madam Chair, no revision until now. And when you talk about upholding fiscal sustainability and stability, the administration is contradicting itself. Nothing has been done until 17 years on. So we really should criticize you. Next, on riding establishment, the last category. Again, the last revision date was 1997, and now it will be increased by $700 or so. Again, the question is, why wasn't any revision done in the past 17 years? So my criticism is this. The managerial level of the administration has been slacking. So is it true Is it the reason why we have not seen any revision over the past 17 years, such that this time is either an increase of 10% or 20%? If we do it gradually, we won't impose heavy cost on operators. So, Mr. Wong, please respond. Is it the case that consumers or users will not be affected? And secondly, why hasn't there been any revision for so long? Now, to uphold fiscal prudence, we should regularly review the fee levels. But the historical background is such that because of Hong Kong's economic cycle, whenever we wanted to review the fees and charges, we were advised to freeze the fee levels, and that happened on a number of occasions. And we face the same problem with the fee items under the FHD. Because of policy considerations, many fee items were frozen. But in fact, the Financial Secretary has shown determination to take this on properly, and he has urged us to comprehensively review the items and especially review the items which have not been reviewed for a very long time. Let me emphasize that you should not mix these with those that will affect people's livelihood. These don't affect people's livelihood directly. We have seen 4 terms of government, and it's been 17 years, and it's a jump of 20%. I don't ask for a response. Yes, the member's view is noted. I just want to emphasize that the fee increase would cause an increase in their revenue by about $100,000. So I also have a question. Is there any rule within the administration that roughly how long would you think it's appropriate to review the fees and charges? And second question on consultation. You said only feedback from 2 persons has been received. One indicated support and one had reservations. He asked for the fees to be frozen. So eventually, based on these 2 comments, you decided to increase the fees. So my question is, can you have a more extensive consultation? These don't affect people's livelihood. So, for example, on riding establishment, you propose to increase the license fees. Maybe we can expect that for those having riding lessons, etc., does that mean that the cost will be transferred to these members of the public? Can we expect that after the increase of fees, the cost will be transferred to consumers?
Would you agree, first of all, with them, with the operators, that they should not just blame it on the government when they want to increase customers' or clients' expenditure? DS, as I said, there will be an increase of just like $18. We have told the stakeholders, and the department has issued about 1,700 letters to license holders and other stakeholders. 1,700 letters have been issued, and we have only got 2 responses. This is to respond to the chairman's question. As to the first question, the frequency of fee adjustment, basically we do it regularly, but the important principle is for the user to pay the full cost. And if we cannot achieve full cost recovery, we will have to consider adjusting the fees and charges. But our policy is to have regular reviews. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. 2 points. I hope the department can write us a paper to let us know what the costs are like. You can let us know what the costs are like. Yes, we are not achieving full cost recovery now, but we do not know whether there is really an increase in cost in tackling such tasks. I'd like to have a paper on that. Secondly, in terms of fee levels, we are talking about an increase of about $100, etc. In terms of license fees, I believe there will not be any impact on the operation or transfer. Even if they want to transfer the cost to clients, I don't know how they are going to do it, because I think other aspects of costs would be even higher. And I believe we should go for full cost recovery. And you should do so according to our plan. Do you go for yearly or biannual reviews? I'd like to know what is involved. You say you may have a mechanism to do the review. Is it a yearly or biannually? DS, first of all, the rate of cost recovery. In the annex to the paper, there is a table showing a lot of figures. If you want more figures, perhaps I can go back and supplement them after the meeting. As for the frequency of adjustment, as I said, we do it regularly. And as we said at the beginning, there are basic principles. If there are fees and charges which have not been adjusted for a long time and we go for hefty increases, that shouldn't be the case. So even if the cost recovery rate is low, we might want to stagger the increases. And the principle is do it in stages, especially with regard to fees and charges that have an impact on livelihood. So the brief reply is we conduct regular reviews, but we'll have to look at each item on their individual merit. The purpose is to minimize impact on the public. That I understand. Chairman, I'd like to know whether you would go for regular, meaning fixed term reviews like every year or every 3 years, but now adjustment has only been made after 17 years, for example. When you say regular, how regular do you mean? Usually, costing can be done every year, but sometimes we don't have a lot of applications for certain licenses, and therefore we might like to wait longer before we introduce an increase. So it really depends on the number of applications for a certain license, and there is no general rule. If there are many applications for a certain license, then we will have more frequent reviews. If like only 10 people apply for a license every year, then we may have not so frequent reviews. Okay, on this item, any more questions? If not, members, can you register your wishes? Is it that you do not object to the administration proceeding with legislation on these fees and charges? No, we do not object. Okay, any other views? If not, that's all for this item. We thank Mr. Christopher Wong, Mr. Thomas Sit, and Mr. Clive Lau. Now we go to the next item, which is regulatory control on the sale of chilled meat in fresh provision shops. Let us ask the administration team to come in.
咁我哋咧係歡迎食衛局嘅副局長陳肇始。
We welcome Professor Sylvia Chan, Undersecretary for Food and Health, Mr. Christopher Wong, Deputy Secretary, Mr. Lau Chi Wong, Assistant Director from FEHD, and also Dr. Chow Cho Yu, Head Risk Assessment section from FEHD. Those members who would like to ask questions on this item, please signify your intention. Mr. Wong Kwok-hing, Mr. Stephen Ho, any more? Okay, can we ask the Undersecretary for Food and Health, Professor Sophia Chan, to take us through the paper briefly? Then we'll open the floor for questions by members. Thank you, Chairman. This is an item on the regulatory control on the sale of chilled meat and poultry in fresh provision shops, or FPS. This paper reports to members. As I said, this is the regulatory control on sale of chilled meat and poultry in FPS. And according to food business regulations, anyone who carries on any food business which involves the sale of fresh, chilled, or frozen meat, beef, mutton, pork, reptiles, fish, and poultry must obtain an FPS license granted by the FEHD. Taking into account the need for chilled meat and poultry to be stored at a temperature between 0 to 4 degrees Celsius for the purpose of ensuring food safety, the FEHD stipulates through the licensing requirements and conditions for issuing a FPS license that a refrigerator of suitable capacity and in good working order shall be provided at the premises for the storage and display of the sale of chilled meat and poultry, with its temperature being kept between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius at all times. The Ombudsman, on the 24th of October 2013, issued a direct investigation report on the regulation of sale of chilled meat, pointing out that it was quite common for shops selling chilled meat and poultry to breach the licensing condition which stipulates that chilled meat and poultry for sale shall be stored at a temperature between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, and that some shops even appeared to be selling chilled meat and chicken as fresh meat and chickens for higher gain. In this connection, the Ombudsman has made a number of recommendations to the FEHD. The FEHD has always been concerned about the storage of chilled meat and poultry at the wrong temperature and selling chilled meat as fresh meat. We would conduct special operations on such breaches. With regard to the Ombudsman's recommendations in the direct investigation report, the FEHD has already taken steps to implement the recommendations. Number one, if FPS selling chilled meat and poultry which have been issued with warnings for breaches of licensing conditions, then the FEHD will increase the frequency of surprise checks or inspections at these shops and also lengthen the observation period so as enhance the effectiveness of the regulatory regime and the deterrence against such irregularities. And starting from June 2013, we have required licensees to take immediate rectification actions upon receipt of warning. And the FEHD has formulated clear guidelines to define minor breaches and enforcement actions for strict observance by inspection officers. If a subsequent breach by the FPS concerned is detected, enforcement action will be taken under the warning letter system. Number three, in respect of a licensee of an FPS whose license has previously been cancelled due to repeated breaches of licensing conditions governing temperature control in the storage or display of chilled meat and poultry, or due to sale of frozen or chilled meat and poultry as fresh meat and poultry, the FEHD will refuse to process applications from the licensee, his or her representative or business partner for any FPS license in relation to the same premises for a period of 12 months from the date of cancellation of the license. Number four, the FEHD has published leaflets and posters on the proper storage of chilled meat and poultry, so as to promote public awareness that chilled meat and poultry must be stored and displayed for sale at a temperature between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius in FPS. and that otherwise the shop would have breached the relevant licensing conditions. Also, members of the public are encouraged to report these irregularities to the FEHD. The FEHD will release information through the media about shops whose licenses have been cancelled due to persistent breaches and is prepared to upload such information to the department's website for public reference. And also some information. Since 2013 to January 2014, the FEHD issued a total of 48 verbal warnings and 10 warning letters to FPS for the improper storage or display for sale of chilled meat or poultry. During the same period, the FEHD also detected a case of sale of chilled poultry as fresh poultry in a FPS. Cancellation of the license is being considered. Chairman, the FEHD will continue to strengthen control over irregularities in the sale of chilled meat and poultry in FPS, stamp out shops which persistently commit such irregularities and convey to the trade the importance of abiding by the law. The administration will review the effectiveness of the regulatory measures from time to time for the purpose of ensuring food safety and hygiene. Thank you, Chairman.
多謝副局長。咁我哋
Thank you, Undersecretary. Members who have indicated their wish to speak are 5: Wong Kwok-hing, Stephen Ho, myself, Wu Chi-wai, and Kenneth Chan. Any more members who would like to speak on this item? Mr. Peter Chung. We have 6 members, and we can discuss this item until 3:50. Let us say 4 minutes each. First of all, Mr. Wong Kwok-hing, 4 minutes including a reply. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I am of the view the Ombudsman has very accurately commented on the work of the FEHD vis-à-vis the regulation of FPS. I think enforcement has been lax and there has been too little enforcement. In the trade, we understand there are usually 2 kinds of criticisms and also complaints from the public. Number 1, selling chilled meat and chickens as fresh meat and chickens. Usually the meat involved is beef, mutton, and chicken. Because fresh beef is now selling at over $100 a catty, in other words, at a very high price. Therefore, there is an incentive for FPS to defrost frozen beef and sell it as fresh beef. Sometimes chemicals have been added to the beef for better coloring illegally. I'm of the view that the administration has been too lax in law enforcement. I believe this kind of deception should be more stringently tackled. You have identified only 1 case throughout an entire year of the sale of chilled poultry as fresh poultry. I think that is why we have this big problem.
And the second question is about the refrigerators in FPS. Very often they're not kept at 0 to 4 degrees. We see meat being defrosted and even with blood oozing out. It's just left there for consumers to choose. So I think the FEHD should step up inspections. Just 48 verbal warnings and 10 warning letters in a year. I think this reflects that enforcement hasn't been strong enough. Undersecretary. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wong. The FEHD conducts inspections and it also takes a risk management approach in conducting inspections. That is, for these stores, selling food items. They categorize the risk levels into low, medium, and high, and the frequency of inspections depends on their risk levels. For frequent breaches and for stores where there are more complaints, the department will also step up inspections. And the Ombudsman has also recommended the FEHD step up inspections. And as set out in the paper, the FEHD will continue to take the risk-based approach. And for FPS with lots of complaints or with a higher risk level, there will be more frequent inspections. And on refrigerators, another measure to strengthen enforcement is that apart from verbal warning, some time may be allowed for rectification. But in fact, now no time is allowed, and the FPS will be required to rectify the situation immediately. For example, to put things back into the refrigerator. In short, many markets managed by the FEHD are problematic. The supervision over these FEHD managed markets is lax. Next, Mr. Stephen Ho. Actually, my question is similar to Mr. Wong's question. The Ombudsman's report issued last year states that there are a lot of shortcomings and there are frequent breaches of the regulations in relation to chilled meat and poultry. And Mr. Wong Kwok-hing just now mentioned that the law was strict, but the enforcement was lax. So he asked about how enforcement could be stepped up. And my question is, why haven't you stepped up enforcement until now? And is it necessary to increase resources? And what about the establishment? My second question, see if you can answer this. You just pick out one store selling chilled poultry or chilled chicken as fresh chicken. And during festive seasons, for example, winter solstice or before Chinese New Year, and as told by many members of the public, stores sell chilled chicken as fresh chicken. Of course, not this year, because this year no fresh chicken was on sale. But in future, during Chinese New Year or winter solstice, how will you step up inspection? If you can't even do that at ordinary times, how can you do it during festivals? So you can't really tackle offenders. I'd like to hear your response, Undersecretary. Thank you, Mr. Ho, for your comment. And maybe I will speak first, and I'll defer to the Director of FEH to supplement. And on inspections, you're right. Of course, it has to do with resources. And the FEHD adopts a risk-based inspection system. That is, for FPS selling chilled meat and poultry, they are categorized into low risk, medium risk, and high risk. For high risk FPS, they'll be subject to more frequent inspections and less frequent for medium risks FPS, so on and so forth, so that priorities can be accorded to higher risk ones. As for seasonal circumstances, there might be special operations. Maybe, if possible, I can ask the Assistant Director to supplement. Yes, please also explain to us how you categorize based on the risk levels. On fresh provision shops, they are inspected under the risk-based inspection system, RBIS, and this system contains an annual exercise of reviewing the risk level of the FPS, including when we look at the store's record, whether it has been prosecuted over the past year, whether it has received any warning letters, etc., and also the shop area. And after we assess the risks, we will, according to the risk level, conduct inspections. That's 4 weeks for high risk, once every 4 weeks for high risk, and 10 weeks for medium risk, and 20 weeks for low risk. And we'll also increase the frequency based on some circumstances. For example, for previous offenses or repeated offenders, rather, we will increase the frequency of inspections. And based on the Ombudsman's recommendations, we have also stepped up enforcement and inspection, and we will frequently inspect the FPS until the irregularities have been rectified. So for irregularities, the FPS is required to rectify the situation, or we will continue to follow up and conduct follow-up inspections. And within 6 months after issuing 3 warning letters, their license would be cancelled. I also have a number of questions. The Ombudsman's report recommends the FEHD to increase the frequency of inspections, and the Assistant Director just now agreed that the frequency will be increased. But my question is, have you increased manpower? The Ombudsman's report criticizes the FEHD for lax enforcement and infrequent inspection. So what is the reason for that? Is it because of insufficient manpower or infrequent inspections? And in responding to the Ombudsman's recommendations, you agree that it will be step up, but have you increased manpower? If you haven't, how have you increased the frequency of inspections so as to address the criticisms of the Ombudsman? And as I said just now, we have increased the frequency of inspections on offending FPS, and will continue to adopt the risk-based inspection system. This remains unchanged because we consider it necessary to focus our resources on high-risk premises or repeated offenders. So we have not adjusted the frequency of inspections based on different risk levels. However, for the irregularities I mentioned, we will step up inspections until the irregularities have been rectified. On manpower, the problem was, according to the Ombudsman's report, on minor irregularities. Our staff and inspectors had different standards on minor irregularities, and we have issued guidelines to our colleagues so that they would constantly review these irregularities. What about FPS in markets managed by FEHD? How many of them, in terms of percentage, belongs to high-risk groups and repeated offenders? Have you assigned staff to monitor the situation? I sometimes go to market as well. For these FPS, well, they have refrigerators, but very often they sell meat displayed on the counter, and you just pick up the chilled meat with a pair of tongs, and in fact the meat doesn't come out from the refrigerator, and these are irregularities, albeit no complaints from the public and no inspection from FEHD. So the Ombudsman has made some recommendations. The FEHD has followed up on them, but can it really change the irregularities which are so prevalent? Now, on markets managed by the FEHD, we apply the same standards as far as regulations are concerned. They are required to observe the same licensing conditions for FPS. And according to the same mechanism, within 6 months after the issuance of 3 warning letters, the tenancy will be terminated. For market stalls selling chilled meat, we inspect these stalls once every 8 weeks. For irregularities, they will be handled in the same manner as that for fresh provision shops. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai, followed by Dr. Kenneth Chen. Thank you, Madam Chair. FPS can sell fresh, chilled, or frozen meat. These 3 categories can be sold under the FPS license, and it's causing a great confusion to the public. So the administration should clarify the position and not to include all 3 categories under the same license. And the second question is about minor irregularities and giving the offending shops a chance to rectify the irregularities. However, if the FPS is allowed to sell chilled meat as fresh meat, the risks is very serious. There is no way to find out the source of the food items, the quality, and you can't monitor the food quality. Can you explain to us why they will be given a chance and the license will not be cancelled until 3 repeated offences within 6 months? And third question has to do with FPS selling frozen meat. And as Madam Chair mentioned just now, the meat sometimes will be defrosted for sale. But if the item should only be sold in this frozen state, this is a major irregularity. However, the FEHD doesn't seem to view it as a serious irregularity. So for chilled or frozen food that have been defrosted for sale, the risk level is actually very high. So can you respond to my questions?
Thank you, Mr. Wu, for those questions. I think Mr. Wu has correctly pointed out that when food items are not displayed and stored at the right temperature, there is a risk. In the licensing conditions, the FEHD states clearly that if it is chilled or frozen meat, then the meat item should be sold in a certain condition. If this is not abided by, that constitutes a breach. You said if there are breaches, why do we issue warning letters and then give time for the operators to rectify the wrongdoings? As I said, in June last year, the FEHD has already stepped up control. Before that, if there is a breach, time will be given to rectify the wrong. If it is not from 0 to 4 degrees, for example, then the operators will be given time to put the meat back into a refrigerator. But now immediate action has to be taken. And this is about manpower. If it is for immediate rectification, then they have to do it there and then, and they will not be given a few hours before FEHD inspectors go back to visit the shop. So now it has been stepped up already, and the FEHD will do whatever is necessary because FPS have to rectify the wrongs, and in fact there is also risk for them. Their licenses can be revoked. Next, Mr. Kenneth Chan. Thank you, Chairman. As the Undersecretary said, this paper is a result of a direct investigation report from the Ombudsman. I don't know whether you have that report with you. In para 22 of the report, it says that it is our view that if the public have all the information and be more alert, then consumers' complaints and reports will be helpful to the monitoring and regulatory work of the FEHD. If you have read public administration, this is just common sense. Therefore, under this premise, and if we can also look at the Ombudsman's report and then this paper, near the end, you say that the FEHD will issue information through the media about FPS whose licenses have been cancelled, and the same information will be uploaded to the website of the department for public reference. I don't know whether this is done in response to the Ombudsman's report. Now you can imagine there are licenses for people to sell chilled meat, which should be stored at 0 to 4 degrees. You will show their addresses, you will show the inspection dates and inspection results, and whether any breaches have been discovered. If yes, then did you issue a verbal warning or a written warning, and how much time has lapsed, etc., etc. If we can have this kind of website, or if there is this web page on the FEHD website, then consumers can help you do the monitoring. Then you can still use your RBIS with low, medium, and high risks. The information should be uploaded to the website, and I believe this will be welcomed by the public. And I believe by so doing, you will be able to implement in full the requirement of the Ombudsman in para 22 of his report. So I'd like to ask whether the FEHD will do this, or do you just say a license has been cancelled? I think the process is important. I think public health is important, and risks should always be considered. Why don't you do this so that you can empower consumers to help monitor the situation for the FEHD and thereby protecting public health? Undersecretary, thank you. Mr. Chan, in the Ombudsman's report, the requirement is to release information of FPS which have been involved in a series of breaches, and the information should be uploaded onto our web page. This is not being done at the moment, but the Ombudsman hopes the FEHD can do this, and the FEHD has adopted that recommendation. I understand that the member would like to know the process as well, but when we release information, we have to strike a balance. The information must be easy to understand, and whether we should release the entire process. The initial view of the FEHD is to just release the shop name. But I believe the FEHD has heard Mr. Chan, and they will certainly consider Mr. Chan's view to see whether that is indeed the best way forward. So this is so mind-boggling. This is not about cost. This is not because you don't have the information. So why don't you just upload it to the website? What kind of balance are you talking about? Please think about this. Please do not be wishy-washy about the entire task. In fact, this will act as an incentive to the trade. Maybe you can promote a code of practice so there are more people who abide by the law. We should not just talk about a carrot, but we can also have the stick. Okay, please, your time is up. Next one, Mr. Peter Chung. Chairman, I seldom visit markets, but I can tell fresh meat from chilled meat and frozen meat. My questions are, number one, if chilled meat is stored in room temperature, and if frozen meat is also stored in room temperature, what kind of risks would that mean for the public? In other words, if the meat is consumed by people, what would be the harm? You know, the public would always think, let us just cook the meat fully and there will be no harm. Is that the case? Secondly, I said I could tell fresh meat from chilled or frozen meat, but I'm not sure I can always do it right. But I suspect members of the public will just touch the meat to see whether it is a little cold. So why don't we teach the public to tell the difference? It will be too late when people have consumed that kind of meat and be harmed. So we should let them know how to tell the difference between the different kinds of meat. And then you don't need the FHD to do so many rounds of inspections because the public would already know who are the unscrupulous operators. Third question. I think the FHD has stepped up inspections really because of the Ombudsman's reports. I'd like to know the number of inspections in 2013 and 14, and then what kind of increase or decrease would that be compared to a year before? The fourth question, how many FPS licenses have been issued and how many inspectors there are who do rounds to these FPS? So let us have the figures and so we can sympathize with you and maybe ask for more manpower on your behalf. Under Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chung. First question, the risks. Could I defer to Dr. Chow of the Center for Food Safety? Dr. Chow, please. Thank you, Chairman. If meat is stored at the wrong temperature, there will be the growing of bacteria. And the Ombudsman's report has already included our viewpoint. Our viewpoint is that if food is stored at the wrong temperature, there is a chance for bacteria to increase or multiply. But that would depend on what kind of bacteria we are talking about. And literature has stated that when bacteria increases, the food will be corrupted. You may smell a bad odor. And the Ombudsman said that there could be the production of biotoxins from food decay. And of course, such meat would be cooked before consumption. And literature has stated that different kinds of bacteria would be competing among themselves, like salmonella and other kinds of bacteria. Professor Wong Kwok-hing agrees with that viewpoint. If food item is stored at the wrong temperature and there is food decay, then the quality of the food will suffer. And so we should look at it from these two aspects. A lot of the details are in the Ombudsman's report. Maybe you can supplement the answers to the other questions later. How many more inspectors have you got, and have you stepped up inspections and the numbers? Next, Dr. K.K. Kwok, and then in the second round we have Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Any more? Dr. Kenneth Chan. Thank you, Chairman. I find this a little strange. The Ombudsman has in fact criticized the FEHD of not having done a good job, but it seems you are telling me that this is not a big issue, and you seem to be glossing over the issue. For example, you say there could be the cancellation or suspension of license if there have been 3 warning letters in a stretch of 6 months. But this is not the main point. The point is, you should look under the carpet. You are now only looking at the surface. You say there would not be any more license issued if there have been 3 warnings issued. But I don't want to take your word for it, because throughout 2013, only 1 case of cancellation is being considered. That is a very small figure, and either because the FPS are law-abiding, or you have not been able to detect them. Now, of course, I don't think there is not a problem. I just think that you have not done enough. So can you give me figures to let me know the so-called low-risk FPS? Have you stepped up frequency of inspections to the low-risk FPS? And what do you do at these inspections? Do you just do naked eye inspection? And since you also talk about the bacterial count, what kind of bacteria do you seek to detect? Is it just E. coli, or what kind of bacterial profile do you get? Do you also try to detect anaerobic bacteria? What kind of profiling do you do? And I think the FEHD has not done a good job, and actually the Bureau is not asking it to do more. The Ombudsman has said that you should release information, but it is so simple, and yet I don't know what you're afraid of. You are not releasing that kind of information which should have been released, because with the release of information you can help consumers make the choice, and secondly there will be some pressure exerted on the FPS, because if my shop has been carried on the website for once or twice, it will exercise extra caution because it doesn't want to collapse. And since this will help the FEHD as well, why are you dragging your feet? Do you want the Ombudsman to release another report before you want to quicken your pace? Thank you, Dr. Kwok. You mentioned the number of inspections. I will defer to the AD to give you the details. In the Ombudsman's report, it asks the FEHD to step up inspections, and there are other recommendations that are regarded to be very useful by ourselves and the FEHD, one of which is to step up publicity and public education. I think Mr. Cheung has asked that question. And we are not just talking about the public. Yes, the public can help us do the monitoring, but I believe we should also educate the industry and also the inspectors. They are strengthening the training of their inspectors as well. As you said, when they go to inspect the FPS, they should be able to pick up the problems. Therefore, in response to the report of the Ombudsman, they have stepped up training for their own staff as well, and also they have drawn up guidelines.
On the figures relating to inspections and profiling, I'll defer to the department. On inspections, after the Ombudsman's direct investigation report was released, in relation to the breaches by FPS, Based on the records, we conducted a special round of inspection. The report was released in November, and we took follow-up action afterwards. And we also based the inspections on the new set of guidelines for our staff members to take follow-up action. For the offending premises, if in subsequent inspections they are found to have irregularities based on the new system, after issuing 3 warning letters, we will cancel or revoke the license. 3 consecutive breaches would lead to the license being cancelled and the premises, and we also consider providing a list of the premises of which the licenses have been cancelled to be made available on a website for public access. And we've also prepared pamphlets and posters to educate the public about how chilled and frozen meat should be stored. And if FPS do not follow our requirement in storing or selling fresh chilled or frozen meat, we provide a hotline for members of the public to complain to us. And what about bacterial profiling? Please provide this information afterwards. Second round, 2 more members. I've drawn a line so each member can have 2 minutes, questions and answers included. Mr. Wu Chi-wai and then Dr. Kenneth Chan. A quick one. The Ombudsman states that the irregularities are very prevalent, in particular in relation to chilled and frozen meat. But according to the FEHD, last year there were only 48 verbal warnings and 10 warning letters issued. So there is a huge discrepancy. What is your understanding of prevalent as commented by the Ombudsman? Do you think that by prevalent it means 48 verbal warnings and 10 warning letters? And on breaches, unless you are of the view that it's not a serious breach or it doesn't affect public health, I don't see why the shop should be given 3 chances within 6 months. That means if there are no 3 breaches within 6 months, it can continue to repeat the offense. Will you consider tightening up this requirement? And for fresh provision shops, as I said just now, since the license covers 3 categories, you should consider renaming the fresh provision shop, as it also sells chilled and frozen meat. Now, about the 48 verbal warnings and 10 warning letters over a year, we need to compare the figures with those in the previous year to conclude whether it's prevalent or not. As for what is sold in the fresh provision shop, I think the FEHD has taken note of your comment and will consider it. Yes, please consider renaming FPS. Dr. Kenneth Chan. 2 minutes, so just some comments for the administration's consideration. I'd like to go back to the point about the importance of imparting information. Now, you penalize the shop and the license is about to be cancelled, and you then tell the public. I don't think this is the best way, because information is power for consumers. I urge that all information be made available online for public access, not only for deterrence but also for encouragement, for an incentive, so that, for example, certain shops may receive very few complaints or warnings despite the frequent inspections, and this will incentivize them to follow and abide by the law. And it's also fair to frontline staff, because they have a clear flow of work, and they also work according to different risk levels. And I think this information will also be fair to your frontline inspectors, so that we don't need to speculate whether your colleagues are actually working or not. And we don't need to argue on what is meant by minor irregularities. I've actually drawn up a table, and I can show you later on. So I have little time left. It's just a comment. Here, this paper uses the word chilled. In Chinese, it's 冰鮮. So it's actually oxymoron. If it's chilled, it's not fresh. So the two words are contradictory. It's quite misleading for our consumers. So again, we should consider whether we should call it chilled meat or 冰鮮 in Chinese, or whether we should give it another name. No time for you to respond. Thank you, Dr. Chan. And I think the message is very clear. We're all concerned about food safety. So can the administration, the bureau, the department make more information available on, for example, how fresh, chilled, and frozen meat should be displayed for sale or stored, and how members of the public can consume it safely. I think you should consider in providing this information online. And thank you, administration, for attending. And we come to the last item. That's total diet study. And let me invite the relevant officials in. Professor Sophia Chan, Under Secretary, will stay. And we also have other government officials. Please invite them in. The Secretariat has forwarded an information note to members. And this paper also states that this is the first total diet study in Hong Kong conducted by the Center for Safety, CFS, to estimate the dietary exposure of Hong Kong population to a range of substances and assess the associated health risks. They have issued 7 reports, and the study commenced in March 2010 and would be completed in around this year. And let's first invite Under Secretary to briefly walk us through the progress of the total diet study, and then the floor will be open to members for questions. Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to brief members on total diet study and the related reports. This is the first total diet study, TDS, in Hong Kong. The aim is to estimate the dietary exposure of the Hong Kong population and various population subgroups to a range of substances, including contaminants and nutrients, and thus assess any associated health risks. Now, TDS assesses a number of items, and it's based on a recommendation from international authorities, public health significance, and public concern. In total, over 140 substances have been covered in the study, including persistent organic pollutants, pesticide residues, metallic contaminants, processing contaminants, mycotoxins, and nutrients. And the TDS commenced in March 2010, and in relation to food sampling and laboratory analysis, the work has been completed, and the study would be completed in 2014 as scheduled. As of December 2013, 7 reports have been released by the CFS in relation to total diet study, that is, the dietary exposure of the local population to dioxins and dioxin-like, inorganic arsenic, polybrominated diphenyl ethers (PBDEs), pesticide residues, metallic contaminants, acrylamide, and mycotoxins. And based on the findings of each study, relevant advice to the public and the trade was formulated. And these 7 reports on total diet study have been uploaded online for public access. And all the existing data have also been forwarded to the WHO in relation to the that's called Global Environmental Monitoring System on Food Contamination Monitoring and Assessment Program, GEMS in short. And we're going to evaluate the first TDS in 2014 after all reports have been issued in relation to the dietary exposure of the local population to organochlorine and certain nutrients. The analysis and evaluation will cover the conduct of the study, the method of testing and analysis, and the range of substances being tested. And subject to the evaluation results, the CFS will prepare the second population-based food consumption survey for the purpose of continuously monitoring the relevant food safety risks. And I will invite Dr. Ho Kwok-hing of the Center for Food Safety to brief members on the result of the total diet study. Thank you, Madam Chair. We have issued 7 reports in relation to this total diet study, and the study outcomes are quite significant. I'd like to highlight some salient points. The first one is about the intake of methyl mercury by pregnant women, and the exposure to methyl mercury by pregnant women slightly exceeds the permissible limit, daily limit, and this has a bearing on the brain development of children, and therefore we recommend pregnant women to avoid taking or consuming fish during their pregnancy, because they predating fish because they contain a higher level of methyl mercury, and these predating fish can be found in tuna, Alfonsino shark, etc. But again, fish contain many essential nutrients and high quality proteins and omega-3 fatty acids, and these nutrients are also essential to the brain development of fetuses. So on the one hand, pregnant women should avoid eating predating fish, but on the other hand, they should also eat more fish. The other study has to do with acrylamide, and the CFS previously conducted a number of studies on acrylamide. This is genotoxic carcinogen, and it is found to be toxic to the nervous system and reproductive systems of experimental animals. And our study shows that our level is similar to levels used overseas. And for potato chips, fried potato, the level of acrylamide is higher. And apart from fried potato chips and fried potato, the Chinese-style stir-frying vegetables can also generate a high level of acrylamide. It is an important source of our diet.
And overall speaking, vegetables account for a high rate of exposure to acrylamide. But we can take effective measures to reduce the production of acrylamide. For example, before stir-frying vegetables, we can blanch the vegetables. Or we can boil or steam vegetables. As long as the temperature does not exceed 120 degrees Celsius, acrylamide usually is not produced. But of course, we can also eat some vegetables raw. Okay, let us try to see how many members would like to ask questions first. Mr. Wong Kwok-hing, Mr. Alan Leong, Dr. K.K. Kwok, and myself. Any more? If not, four minutes for each member. Our meeting should end by 4:30. Mr. Wong Kwok-hing, 4 minutes including the reply. Chairman, first, I'd like to welcome the TDS and the release of 7 reports. I'd like to thank the administration for doing this. My question has to do with the second food consumption survey by the CFS. I'd like to make 2 proposals. As you know, the Hong Kong population is aging. Well, from a positive light, it means we have longevity. We are living longer lives. That should be something good. And I believe Dr. Ho will know that hypertension, coronary diseases, and cholesterol are health problems. And some members of the public have asked me to say this to you. You might want to look at diabetes, for example, and do some surveys. So that we can avoid exposure to such in our daily diet, like hypertension and heart disease. How can we steer clear of such diseases vis-à-vis our daily diet? I think members of the public, especially those who are chronically ill and the elderly, they want to have a healthy diet, but they also like good food. They like tasty food. I can give you an example. Some diabetes patients say they would like to eat ice cream, but all ice cream have a high level of sugar. I know in Hong Kong there are just 1 or 2 places selling sugarless ice cream, but they're expensive. They are not easily available. So I think you can help promote low sugar or sugarless food. Or can you promote low sodium food? So you can promote health and reduce the incidences of diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. You know, these are diseases that come with age. Undersecretary, thank you. I think what Mr. Wong is talking about are really chronic diseases affecting the aging population. We also care a lot about this, and we are doing a few things in this respect. We have a committee which will follow up on these issues. At the CFS, if you go to their website, you will see that it has started to work with food manufacturers to see how less sugar, less sodium can be used in food production. Some pamphlets have also been produced, and Dr. Ho can certainly say more. This is a panel on food safety, but on the side of health, we also care about non-communicable diseases or chronic illnesses. There is a committee on that, and the DFH is doing a lot to educate the public that even if food includes a lot of sugar or salt, how they can eat healthily. Next, Mr. Alan Leong, and then Dr. K.K. Kwok. Chairman. I think we have spent $5.4 million on the TDS. Is it that we don't need to spend more? What about the second population-based survey? How much will that cost? The first question, therefore, is about money. Secondly, in para 6 of the paper, it says that basically samples are collected according to age and gender, and 5,008 samples have been selected. I'd like to know, when you went for sampling, did you care about the income groups of these sampled individuals? Because people with different income levels may consume different kinds of food with different ingredients. So was that a concern to you? And then also in para 6, you say that the future survey, let me see. No, actually, sorry, I'd like to go to para 24. I am done with para 6. That is the income group. The third question is on para 24. You say you are formulating a second population-based food consumption survey for the purpose of keeping food safety risks of concern. I'd like to know how that survey can help you detect the risks so that it will be helpful to tackle those risks. Undersecretary. Thank you, Mr. Leong. Money-wise, and also your question on sampling, whether we paid attention to the income groups of the individuals, I think I can defer to Dr. Ho for those two. As for the last question on food consumption survey, my understanding is we must first of all do the survey first before we can have the TDS, because first we need to understand how Hong Kong people eat, the amount of food they take in, and the dieting pattern of Hong Kong people. And only then can we go into a TDS. I thought you have done it in the first stage. That is why I'd like to know what you exactly do. Can I ask Dr. Ho to supplement? Yes, thank you, Mr. Leong, for your questions. Para 6. In the first food consumption survey, we contacted 5,008 individuals. We could see that they consumed over 1,400 food items, rich or poor. And then when we did the TDS, we did not have the capacity to test 1,400 food items, so we only chose the more representative ones. And we said in para 8 that we tested 150 food items. And in Annex 2, you can see those food items. As you can see, those are very common food items. When we chose these food items, we wanted to look at the consumption level. And those with high consumption level were given a closer look. And then for food items where consumption is low, but the level of pollutants is high, we still included them, and altogether 150. You could see Chinese-style buns with a crispy crust and also buns with raisins. And then para 24, the second food consumption survey. In fact, dieting and consumption change with time. Other countries also do such surveys every 10 years to gauge the changes. Now, we do not have a concrete plan as to when the second food consumption survey will be done, but we have to start doing preparatory work. We have set up a task force to study into the second food consumption study, say, for example, what food items should be included and what the methodology should be. We are now researching into that. When the TDS is over, we can launch the second food consumption survey immediately. That is our plan. But what items, what issues are we going to look at in the second food consumption survey? Then for that, we have to do a review of the first. Mr. Leong also asked you about the income groups of individuals surveyed. The answer is no, right? But will you consider doing that for the second stage? When we conduct the study, yes, we can certainly do analyses according to the different income groups. If you look at our report, we have grouped individuals according to age. But as I said, we also separated pregnant women. We actually sampled people from the age of 20 to 84, and we also separate them by gender. In other words, you actually have the information, and you can always show it. Is that right? Yes. And also the cost. We absorb it as our recurrent expenditure. But we also contract out the work if necessary. We have 3 more members, Dr. K.K. Kwok, myself, and Mr. To. 4 minutes. And there will not be a second round because time will be up after that. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Chairman, I think this study is meaningful. But the TDS must bring about behavioral change amongst the public before it can be called successful. The TDS is not good enough if it just identifies the risks. I think Mr. Alan Leong has asked a very realistic question. As you know, people of different income groups eat differently. Dr. Ho, I don't know whether you know that in poor districts, children always eat instant noodles maybe once or twice a day, and they also consume canned food. This is what their daily diet is like. It is quite different from children who eat organic vegetables in Repulse Bay. So there are government policies saying that we should do more for children and young people so they do not lose at the starting line. The food bank also helps to alleviate poverty, and my question for the CFS is, how do you wish to spend money so that our next generation would be in better health? Secondly, you sample people from the age of 20 to 84. What about children growing up who are above the age of 5? Those who are under 5 may still be consuming baby formula, and there are studies done on that already. And so what about children between the age of 5 and 20? Will you do a study on them? And number 3, I'm a little worried whether it be acrylamide or PBDEs. You say people should soak vegetables for an hour. I don't know who can do that. You ask people on the streets who are going to soak vegetables for an hour. This is only theoretically. Is that going to help?
Say most housewives only wash the vegetables or rinse the vegetables for a minute or two, and by how much would the pollutants or contaminants be reduced? I think since we already have abundant data, we should consider how the data can effectively help people of different age groups or different occupations. I think our responsibility is to translate the data into useful information and to publicize the information to the public through government's APIs, etc. Under Secretary, I agree with Dr. Kwok. You have given us a very useful comment, and that is how we can translate data into useful information and educate the public. Not all members of the public have internet access, so maybe I can ask Dr. Ho to say something more about that work. TDS is part of our risk assessment process. Another important element is about publishing risk-related information, and that is about how we translate data into information to protect public health. And after the report is published, it will be made available in public libraries, it will be uploaded online, and we also exchange with the trade. And we have regular publicity programs, we have seminars and roving exhibitions in housing estates, and also leaflets for the general public. Of course, there are difficulties in terms of publicity, in particular in terms of specific age groups, and we'll continue to step up our work for the purpose of inducing behavioral changes among the general public to lower the risks. And the study contains data, and we can analyze the data to estimate the dietary exposure of the Hong Kong population. We can also look at those with higher levels. For example, high level of acrylamide has to do with high consumption of potato chips, and we can look at the highest or the top 5% and look at their dietary habit, and this can be found in the study, and it can also be broken down by age, but we do not break it down by income levels, because after all it depends on their diet and it's a matter of their choice. And we will then roll out targeted publicity campaigns. In short, Madam Chair, for children, will the study be extended to those below 20 years old? Let me supplement. Before this TDS in year 2000, we already conducted a food consumption survey for youths. And between 2000 and 2005, we published a series of reports targeting young people. And when will you do it again in future? When we talk about harmful substances, we usually measure the dietary exposure throughout an individual's lifespan, not just confining them to the teenage stage. So it's my turn, followed by Ms. Sit Ho. I'm also concerned about fish. Para 10 of your paper, or rather para 12 of your paper, about fish and seafood and their products. You mentioned that for children and pregnant women or those who wish to get pregnant, the CFS advises them not to consume bigger fish And my question is this: what is the channel of publishing the information for children and for women? Do you put it online? Do you upload it online? And that's it? Or have you relied on the Food and Health Bureau's system? For example, the MHCs and also obstetrics units in hospitals, etc., so that you have an effective channel to publicize the information to the affected groups. And for new arrivals, the women may not know how to use the internet, and they may not have access to this information. What other channels do you have apart from the internet in imparting this information? The other is about another point is about inorganic arsenic. And just now we talk about our concern over cadmium in rice, and we now find that inorganic arsenic may also be present in rice. So your advice is to reduce consumption of rice or to rinse rice, and I'm really confused. You say that rice should be washed thoroughly, although without excessive washing. So the public may be confused. What is meant by washing rice thoroughly but not excessively? Do you have a clear set of guidelines? Otherwise, the public doesn't understand what is meant by excessive washing. And also, does your study cover the level of cadmium or inorganic arsenic in rice from different countries of origin? Would you publish this information for the public as well, so that they know whether rice imported from Thailand or mainland contain a higher level of cadmium or arsenic? Maybe I'll defer to Dr. Ho to explain in greater detail this point on the communication of risks and also on inorganic arsenic. Thank you, Madam Chair. As we explained just now, after the report was issued, we would impart the information to the public through various channels. On the consumption of fish, we are more concerned about the intake of fish by pregnant women, and we have worked with the Department of Health. We've prepared leaflets to be distributed via their MCCs, and we have also provided these leaflets to doctors for them to be distributed to pregnant women. For inorganic arsenic, this is also our concern. In particular, the exposure can be found in rice, which is a main dietary source in Hong Kong, and it is carcinogenic. It is also toxic, and there is not a daily tolerance limit for inorganic arsenic. The recommendation is that it should be as low as possible. As rice is a staple food for Hong Kong, and we believe that since Hong Kong is a cultural melting pot, we don't really need to rely too much on rice. We have other alternatives as in order to reduce exposure to inorganic arsenic. So if we maintain a balanced diet, we can reduce exposure to inorganic arsenic. And yes, we should wash rice thoroughly but not excessively. It can be reduced by around 10%. Yes, but I don't get it. What is meant by thoroughly but not excessively? So just do it normally. Just wash rice normally. You don't need to wash it repeatedly, because it can reduce the level by 10% or so. I hope on public education, the CFS or the Department of Health can be clearer, because we are still confused whether we should wash rice 2 times or 3 times or what. So now we're clear. Next, Ms. Sit Ho, the last member. Well, would the administration please tell us what is meant by arsenic? I think it's even more scary if you explain to us. Arsenic is kind of metal. It can exist in different forms. It can exist in its organic form or inorganic form. Inorganic arsenic is carcinogenic. And please tell us what the ordinary people call arsenic. Arsenic is sometimes regarded as poison, and but it depends on the level of intake. So, having read your paper, I feel that we are going to die anyway with without the proper diet. All we can do is to have a balanced diet. Now, about pesticides residues. Last time we talked about it, and after that I did some homework, and in the mainland there are 3 standards in measuring the level of pesticides residues. One is Codex, one is the US standard, one is Euro, and the Euro standard is the most stringent one. My question is in relation to food safety, be it residues of pesticides or substances that might become harmful if it's accumulated in human body. What standards have you adopted? The most stringent one or the most relaxed one? Dr. Ho? It's not directly related to the total diet study. It has to do with the setting of standards, and it depends on the chemical substance. For pollutants like heavy metals, since they are contaminants or pollutants, the level should be as low as possible. But if it's as strict as 0, then we will have no food for consumption. So it should be as low as possible, but at the same time it should be pragmatic or practicable. For pesticides, it's different from contaminants because the purpose is to eradicate pests, and we need to conduct field tests to see how much pesticides have to be used to have an effective pest control, and that also depends on different regions. For hot weather, it may be the level may be higher, and for Euro countries, less pesticides may be used, and that is practical explanation why the Euro standards are more stringent. It may not be practical for us to adopt the Euro standards. So first of all, we draw reference from the Codex standards, and we also look at the volume of trade, because we would like to consider our trading partners' standards as well. I hope in setting standards, we should not compromise our standards for food safety just for the sake of accommodating our trading partners and adopting their standards. Some contaminants can pollute water source, some are carcinogenic. And we should not relax our standards. Even if it doesn't pollute the soil or the water in Hong Kong, we eventually will take in the pollutants or the contaminated food. So I hope the standards could be as stringent as possible, and you should have transparency in giving information to LegCo.
Last time I asked the question, and that is the central body. You remember there was a stakeholder saying as a central body. So is it political or commercial pressure over our shoulders, so we are relaxing the standards? I will follow up on that point, Chairman. Just now we said that we would look at food safety as well in the next meeting. Undersecretary, you were not here, but members said that you should comment on the presence of cadmium in imported rice and what has come out from your relevant study. I'm a little frightened about the content of arsenic in rice. It won't kill you, but we are eating a lot of it. I'd just like to add that when people say you should not eat too much rice but wheat products, but actually it is also problematic. Look at genetically changed wheat products. If you eat too much of it, you can become obese. I hope you can let us know the entire picture. In the long run, we'll all die. But I hope the administration will do this. When you release the information, you must make use of layman terms. And you must not be biased. You must let us know the entire picture. Well, consumers need more information about food safety, nutrition, and what food to eat. The more open, the more transparent you are, the better. You say you will look into rice and wheat and other food products. The research reports should be published in full, so people know whether the brand of rice they are consuming is the one you have just looked at, and whether the content of certain things will be higher in certain food products or food products from a certain country, so consumers can make their informed choices. If they know that there is this risk with a certain brand of rice, I might prefer bread, and I want to know whether consuming bread is safe. I hope you can release all the information to the public, and the CFS should be more aggressive in the release of information on food safety. If you only put it on your website to issue warnings, for example, that a certain substance is in excessive amounts, then we might have missed it. And if you just issue a press release but the newspapers do not carry it, then we do not know. Perhaps you should act like the Consumer Council and hold regular press conferences to teach people what fish to eat and not to eat, and how to wash rice and what heavy metals have been found in rice, for example. You have to be more proactive, or else the information will rest with you and at best this council. I think we have made all these points today. And also, Chairman, may I propose that if something is naturally present in some food like arsenic, then we should know. But then other substances are produced in a particular event, say for example Fukushima incident, and if radiation is found in seafood, then we should not eat fish, big or small, for a period. When you release such information, you should tell the public what substances are naturally present so we cannot avoid them. But then we should also know whether the contamination is particularly serious in food from a certain place, or that a certain place loves to use a particular pesticide, and we should, for example, not eat too much of food items from those places. Okay, perhaps we can take up what is left from today's meeting, and if you have more information, please report to members at the next meeting. That's it for the meeting today. Anything under AOB? If not, our meeting is adjourned here. We'd like to thank the administration for coming. Thank you all. Thank you for attending the meeting.